Welcome back, everybody. Here we are at the final lesson of Unit 2, 2.7, Ecological Succession. And without further ado, I'm going to get right into this one. According to the College Board, here's what we need to know. We need to be able to describe ecological succession, so a very simple understanding of it. Make sure you can just very briefly and elaborate on it. And then you're also going to describe the effect of ecological succession on ecosystems. So I'm pretty confident by the end of this lesson, you'll be good on both of those standards. So here we go. What is ecological succession? Well, ecological succession is a predictable series of steps. We can actually predict. Now, it's not like, oh, in 3 months you're going to see this. No, we kind of get an idea of what is going to happen over time that will occur after a disturbance. So there's an ecosystem, it's disturbed. We know roughly what is going to happen next. So hypothetically, we come out to Idlewood, we chop down all the trees, we sell off all the trees for profit. What's going to happen to Idlewood? We have an idea, and we might say in 300 years from now, it'll kind of look like it does now, or maybe it's only 50, 60 years from now, it's going to kind of rebound. So we have this idea, this predictable series of steps. Now, there are two major types of succession: primary succession and secondary succession. They actually are very, very similar in that they are still that predictable series of changes that's going to happen, but when they start is the difference. So let's start talking first about primary ecological succession. Primary ecological succession occurs when there is no soil present. So there's no soil in order to start. So the growing medium in which the plants or the flora are going to start does not exist. How do we get a condition like that? Well, volcanic eruption. I talked about it previously. The idea of the volcanic eruption creating fresh magma all over, which is going to harden into solid rock. That's not a growing medium. You can't put a tree in a rock and expect it to grow. Now, some of you are probably like, I've seen trees growing out of rocks. You probably have, all right? But they're growing because there's nutrients, there's soil, there's other things, and the roots might actually go way under that rock. So it's not just growing in the rock. Or if it is, it's probably not super healthy and big. Now, why does it take such a long time? Well, primary succession takes a very long time because we don't have soil. And soil formation is a very time-consuming process. Somehow you have to take rocks or some other parent material, and you are going to break it down into very, very small pieces. When you break down into small pieces, organic matter is eventually going to find its way there, whether it be through dust or other organisms, very, very simple organisms colonizing it, dying off, building up organic matter. So now you have minerals and now you have organic matter. And that kind of combines together with a little bit of water, a little bit of air, and if it's got the right nutrients, and it can actually lead to soil. Now that takes sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of years for that to happen. The rate of soil formation is incredibly low. And it actually varies depending on where you are on the planet. Sometimes it's too cold, sometimes it's too hot, sometimes it's too wet, too dry. All of those things are going to influence the rate of soil formation. Now, once the soil is established, so once we actually do have something that organisms can grow in, things will start to colonize. Now, how is it going to look? Here in this image you see, it's a timeline roughly of what's going to happen. The first organisms that are going to move in are going to be what we consider our pioneer species. They are the first ones to colonize. They build up that organic matter. Then eventually you're going to get to your grasses. Grasses are very simple. They don't require much soil to grow. And some do. Some of the prairies and stuff like that, they've got like almost 20 feet of soil below them. So they require a lot of soil. And they actually help to stabilize it. But some don't require that much soil. Then eventually you're going to get maybe small herbaceous plants, shrubs, and different things like that. And eventually your first trees are going to move into an area where enough soil is there. And eventually it reaches its final climax stage. Depending on where you are, what biome you're in, the climax stage will look different. Around here, we're expecting a forest. If you go to the center part of the country, you're going to expect grasslands. That is normal. Now, let's compare primary succession to secondary ecological succession. The major difference is the presence of soil. So in this situation, some sort of disturbance has happened. Some sort of disturbance has happened, and the soil has been left behind, but all the vegetation has been removed. Could be clear cutting, could be like a forest fire, could be like an agricultural field that just has been left fallow for many years. The soil's left behind. When the soil is already established, other things can grow rapidly. So if we looked at how long does it take to go from initial starting point to climax community, primary succession takes an immensely long time. Secondary succession can take a long time, but it's not going to take nearly as much time as primary succession because the soil is already there. It is much more rapid than primary succession. So when we look at the successional stages, no matter what, the first organisms to kind of colonize an area, they're going to be known as your pioneer species. These are the first ones to come in, the first ones to be able to colonize. Why? Because they can survive in harsh conditions. You think about it, just an open rock field, or maybe it's an old parking lot or an old building. How is it eventually going to become living? Well, you have to start to put some sort of life form on there. One of the first pioneer species, one of the most common pioneer species, is something called a lichen. A lichen is actually an organism that's a symbiotic relationship between algae and a fungus. And what that lichen can do is it can grow on a flat surface. And what it will do is it'll secrete a very, very dilute acid, and it helps to break down the rock material, the parent material. So it's going through a chemical weathering process. But then the roots and stuff like that will allow it to kind of grow in there. It doesn't have true root system like we think of when we talk about plants, more like a rhizomes, which would be more characteristic of fungi. But it allows stabilization, and it slowly breaks down that rock into smaller and smaller pieces. Now, the algae is photosynthesizing. It's taking in solar energy, it's producing glucose, and that's what's feeding that fungus that is breaking down rock material. Lichen will survive for many years, sometimes hundreds of years, on these rock faces as they slowly are broken down. But it's some sort of organic matter on there. And then other organic matter might start to accumulate. Maybe a bug gets stuck in there and dies off. Maybe other things kind of start to build up. And that's going to eventually build up enough so that you can have your next level of organisms come in, which are your bryophytes. They are your simple plants. The most simple form of plants are bryophytes, which are mosses. Mosses don't have a true vascular system, so they don't have the ability to pump water anywhere. So they have to exist in a moist environment. So they're oftentimes going to be found growing in shaded regions and different things like that. That's why you always hear moss grows on the north side of a tree. Well, it depends. If it's a tree out in the middle of the sun, yes, it'll grow on the north side. But if it's a tree in the middle of the forest, oftentimes you can find moss growing on most sides of the tree. But it's just because it does not have the ability to have a root system that goes and pulls up water. So it can dry out very, very quickly. So moss can die off quickly if it's exposed to a lot of sunlight. But over time, moss builds up. Again, more organic matter, more soil eventually leads to bigger and bigger plants as we work our way through the evolution of an ecosystem. Now, as we talk about, again, depending on what biome you are living in is going to determine the type of ecosystem or climax community that you will have. If we talk about the east coast of the United States, we are deciduous forests. So we are going to be some type of broadleaf forest. Pennsylvania is predominantly one type, but we're going to talk about that in the next slide, the different types of forests, or the climax forests in Pennsylvania. You go to the center part of the country, you go to Iowa, you go to one of those middle states, you're going to find a lot of grasslands. Those are the climax community. That is the mature ecosystem. Over at the end of succession, it will be grasslands. Why won't it be forest? Well, we go back to biomes, talking about the major difference between a forest and a grassland. It's the amount of precipitation. There's not enough water to support large trees. And that is the big difference about what type of climax community we will get. All around the world, you're going to have different types of climax communities depending on the abiotic conditions of that area. So don't think that a climax community is always a mature forest. All right, it's not. But in our area, it is a mature forest. Again, talking about Pennsylvania and looking at the different types of mature forests of Pennsylvania, our area down here, okay, we know that we are predominantly going to see an Appalachian oak forest. When we go out to Idlewood, I will tell you, there's a little hint. Idlewood is not an Appalachian oak forest. It's actually a different type of forest. And it's actually a very unique type of forest for this area. It's not the most common type of forest we have. But you can see around, you see northern hardwood forests or mixed mesophytic forests down here, especially closer to the West Virginia border south of Pittsburgh. All of these different types of forests have all been kind of predicted based on climatic conditions, geological formations, and different structures within Pennsylvania. Now, does succession only take place on land? No. Aquatic ecosystems will also go through a type of succession. Every pond and lake will, for the most part, fill up over time. It's going to fill up with a lot of organic matter. Now, ponds are more common to fill up than lakes because lakes are usually much, much deeper. Remember, the main difference between a pond and a lake is that a lake will have what's called an aphotic zone. We went over this. Hopefully, this is not new to you. Hopefully, you're like, oh, yeah, I actually remember hearing that. Aphotic, no light's getting there, so it's a deep part of a body of water that's found in a lake, whereas ponds only have photic zones, so the sunlight can go all the way down to the bottom. Now, when we look at a pond and how it changes over time, it's going to build up with organic matter. Things like leaves are going to build up, mud, dirt, organisms that might have died off, fish, other insects will find their way into the bottom here and just slowly builds up. So what we see is the organic matter starts to accumulate from the bottom. And then eventually you're going to start to see some of the vegetation will change. And this becomes almost a premier habitat for amphibians. A very shallow body of water is often really utilized by amphibians, especially during their breeding seasons. One of the last stages of aquatic succession or pond succession is what we would refer to as a vernal pond. Vernal, as in the season, spring, is found when there's an abundance of water. So in the spring, usually we have more precipitation, we have an abundance of water around here, and it fills up those ponds. And then by the end of the summer, they're usually dried up. But that vernal pond is timed perfectly for a lot of amphibian reproduction. So you'll see if you go in to find a nice vernal pond, it will be full of a lot of amphibians during the spring seasons when they're reproducing, they're laying their egg mass in these large gelatinous colonies, and then eventually it dries up after the organisms have already left. So here's another look at some different succession of ponds and how different things have changed. This is what we talk about when you hear about like coal in Pennsylvania. It was an old swamp that eventually got buried. This is how you get those things to kind of happen. So it doesn't happen in your lifetime. It's not like, unless there's a major diversion of water going to a body, you're not going to see a pond go from a beautiful, pristine pond to a complete grassy forest or wooded forest in your lifetime. But it might take a couple hundred years, but it is something that we have lots of records of. Now, pause the video right here. Watch this short little video clip all about ecological succession. Kind of approaches it. If you hate the Amoeba Sisters, sorry. They do a good job actually of really breaking down ecological concepts into short videos. It's 6 minutes, 23 seconds. Not the most painful thing you've ever had to watch. You're probably remembering the first 6 minutes of this video as pretty painful, or some of the other videos as pretty painful. I'm sorry about that. I'm doing the best with what I got. All right, so pause it. Come back when you're ready, and we'll move on talking about some species roles within ecosystems. All right, so species role within an ecosystem. Now, we've kind of already talked about it when we talked about food webs and food chains, the idea of different organismal roles within an ecosystem. Now, what we are going to be talking about over the next couple slides is some terminology that's just kind of given to different organisms depending on their role within an ecosystem. So there's a couple that are very easy to understand, and hopefully you'll pick up on. You probably already knew. There might be some other ones I'm just kind of throwing in there just to help you kind of learn about in the future. A keystone species A keystone species is incredibly important because, again, it has an impact on the ecosystem far greater than its population indicates. So we talked about gray wolves are one of the most famous. The next slide's got an amazing video, which I'm going to mandate that you watch, all about gray wolves and how they actually impact the ecosystems, especially in the American West. But these organisms will help keep other populations in check. They help to support other organisms, and they really keep the ecosystem functioning the way it's supposed to. So again, gray wolves, the purple starfish, which exists in intertidal zones in the Pacific Northwest. I know it sounds like a really unique little thing, but since it can help to control the population of different bivalves or different urchins, it is a predator. And those of you who've never watched a video of a starfish eating, you might want to pause this video now and go watch a video of starfish eating. It's incredible. They latch on, then they use their arms to open up bivalves, and they literally throw their stomach up inside of the organism, digest it, and then bring it back. It's kind of cool if you're into that type of thing. I don't know. Beavers obviously are massive environmental modifiers. They build dams to block off waterways, which then causes major impacts to ecosystems in the long run. Prairie dogs, again, prairie dogs dig holes, burrows, but then other organisms will use them. A lot of people, a lot of farmers in the Central America, I don't want to say Central America, that's weird, but the Midwest, but the northern Midwest, so like the Dakotas and stuff like that. A lot of ranchers hate prairie dogs because what they do is they create these tunnel systems, and all these ranchers have cattle, and the cattle will step in the hole, maybe break its leg. It's very detrimental to the cattle. But if you think about prairie dogs living out there in the grasslands, that's their native habitat. The other organisms that live with them, that's their native habitat. The cows are not natively there, but humans are trying to raise these organisms for food because of the diet of humans. It becomes a big cyclical problem that we're dealing with. So hopefully we kind of address that in the long run. And like things like the saguaro cactus. Saguaro cactus found out in the American Southwest. All right, very famous cactus. Some of them are absolutely massive, huge, tall, like 20 plus foot high cacti that are very, very old, take a very long time to grow, but they're also home to many different organisms that live there. They eat the fruit from it, all different organisms, all interacting together. So you can see that a keystone species does not have to also be an apex predator like we talked about with the gray wolf or the Canada lynx in the previous lessons. But this can be a different type of organism that's just going to kind of modify its environment or support other populations within the environment. So it's incredibly interesting to see. I mentioned when we talked about food webs, the idea of a trophic cascade, pulling out a singular organism and the disruptive effects it has on an ecosystem. I am going to make sure you pause this video and watch this. It's actually really cool. It's a short little video, 4 minutes, and it goes through the different impacts that the gray wolves have had since their reintroduction into Yellowstone. And it has triggered a trophic cascade of repair. So by putting a predator back in, now you are controlling the herbivore populations, which are now allowing the plants, the flora, to start to grow. And now you have more fruit available for insects or birds, and it's just reestablishing the way the ecosystem is supposed to be. And that is what we talked about when one of the biggest ecological decisions in the past 20, 30, 40 years in America, besides all the laws and the conservation, has been the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone. I believe it was like 1995 they reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone. Very, very controversial. A lot of people did not want it. People were like, oh, they're going to eat our babies. They're going to eat our cows. No. All right. But the ecological impacts, what they have been able to do to help restore the Yellowstone National Park ecosystem is amazing and immense. If you want to watch another one, this is about Tasmanian devils and how they heal the forest. Again, another keystone species and their role. Again, maybe you don't know too much about Tasmanian devils. Maybe you've watched a little bit of Looney Tunes. I don't even know if you guys grow up watching Looney Tunes anymore. All right. I'm probably dating myself. I don't care. I watched Looney Tunes when I was a kid. So what? All right. But I didn't know much about Tasmanian devils until I watched videos like this. So maybe you guys are interested in learning about their role in the ecosystem. Short little 5-minute, 50-second clip. Watch it, learn from it, and maybe you'll be able to expand on it in the future. Switching gears from keystone species to now talking about something called indicator species. What is an indicator species? An indicator species is a species that we use to help us to indicate the health of an ecosystem. So it helps us to indicate the health of an ecosystem just by the presence of this organism. Now that sounds kind of weird, but it's actually due to other factors associated with it. So I'm going to go through a couple examples, and hopefully by the end you'll kind of be like, oh, this kind of makes sense. Yeah, like seeing this organism means that the water is clean and therefore it's decent ecosystem. Or seeing this organism here means that this habitat is free of major pollutants. So that is very helpful. Usually when we talk about indicator species, we're usually talking about an ecosystem that is tied directly or very, very intimately to water and water pollution. So the first one I want to talk about is a bird. Again, me going back to birds as examples. Sorry, deal with it. I like birds. All right. The Louisiana water thrush. Louisiana water thrush is a small little bird, maybe about 3-4 inches tall. It migrates all the way up from Ecuador and Central America or North South America up to our region and then back each winter. It migrates back and forth. But it is found along mountain streams. We don't really get too many around here. I have heard some out in Idlewood, usually during migration, because Neshaminy Creek is not as pristine of waters as like northeastern Pennsylvania. But up in the mountain streams of northeastern Pennsylvania, you'll find this small little bird. And what it is it's the bioindicator to let me know that the water quality is really good. How do I know the water quality is really good? Because that bird, 95% of its diet is this insect right here. This insect is a mayfly, and mayflies are only found in very, very clean water. So is it easier for me to see a bird or listen for a bird song than it is to turn over a whole bunch of rocks and look at the bottom of the stream to try to find this small insect? Yes, it is. So that's how I can quickly look or identify that a waterway is clean and pristine is the presence of this bird. So that bird is an indicator to the quality of the body of water. Amphibians. If you have a prevalence of amphibians, not just toads, but if you have a prevalence of different amphibians in an ecosystem, it's probably in pretty good shape. Amphibians have such an intimate relationship with pollutants and waterways that they are very, very sensitive to the pollution in the water. So by them being present, you're actually showing that the quality of water is good because they lay their eggs in there. They breathe. Some salamanders and stuff like that will breathe through their skin. All right. When you get pollutants, when you get toxins in the water, it causes them to die off. Amphibians are one of the most threatened families of any organism on the planet. And the reason being is because of that pollution with water. So it's not just pouring chemicals in the water. There's a lot of other things. It could be the temperature of the water. It could be pharma pollution. When people talk about like pharmaceuticals, that you may take a medicine, but when you pee, you might urinate out some of that medicine, and now it's in the waterway. So we talk about like a lot of like birth controls and the hormone disruptors associated with them, or endocrine disruptors. These are all things that are impacting amphibians more than most other organisms on the planet. Piggybacking on the Louisiana water thrush are aquatic macroinvertebrates. Now, aquatic macroinvertebrates, also known as benthic macroinvertebrates. There I go, dropping another word from a previous lesson, benthic. Think back real quick, what does benthic mean? Well, benthic refers to the bottom of a body of water. It's whatever that bottom material is, that substrate. So it could be rocks, it could be mud, it could be leaves, all different things. We talk about bodies of water, the bottom stuff. Now, benthic macroinvertebrates are small bugs. Now, some of them can be big. If any of you do fly fishing or any type of a lot of fishing, you've probably seen a lot of these different types of bugs, especially the flies, the adult versions of some of the flies. They use their patterning for tying flies as fly fishing is. But their nymph or larval stages exist in the water. So they lay their eggs into the water, they hatch as a larva, like an aquatic caterpillar, for lack of better words, and then eventually it grows into a nymph. And these are what nymphs look like, legs with weird bodies, and eventually those nymphs will crawl out of the water and their exoskeleton will break open and the adult will fly out. So things like dragonflies, damselflies, mayflies, stoneflies, caddisflies, all of them use the water to lay their eggs in. So anytime usually you'll see a dragonfly around a body of water, it's probably, if it like starts dipping its tail into the water, it's probably laying eggs into the water. And then those eggs will eventually, sometimes those dragonflies will spend up to 2 to 3 years as a nymph stage before they emerge to live like 2 weeks as an adult and then die off. But the reason I talk about these aquatic macroinvertebrates is because some of them are more tolerant of pollution than others. Things like leeches can be found in polluted waters. They can tolerate the pollution. But mayflies are only found in pristine water, very, very clean water. So depending on the distribution of these macroinvertebrates will determine how clean or dirty the water is. Now, leeches can also be found in clean water, but mayflies can never be found in dirty water. So if you find a bunch of leeches and mayflies, you know the water's clean. If you find a bunch of leeches but no other types of insects, you know the water's probably dirty, all right, or polluted to some extent. Now, if it's really heavily polluted, nothing will live there. But the idea that these different things live together, live in these different ecosystems based on the level of pollution is important. The last one are river otters. River otters, or most otter species, are great indicator species. They live within the water, but they eat and forage on different things, whether it be kelp or bivalves that are found in the water. So these different types of things, like kelp would be only found with sea otters, but just the understanding that most otter species are very intimately involved. Now, they are indicators. If you find otters in a stream, the water is usually pretty good condition. Otters are an interesting organism to find in our area. Very rarely do we find them down in Bucks County, maybe northern Bucks County. But most otters were hunted, trapped, and removed from Pennsylvania. And they've been kind of reintroduced, and they're very, very secretive organisms. Usually you find evidence of them before you actually find them, whether it be shells broken open on the sides of waterways or slides for them coming in and out of the water. Those are usually more commonly found than the actual organism itself. But otters are super cool and super awesome indicator species, help us to identify the health of an ecosystem based on just their presence within that ecosystem. So hopefully we feel like we understand the major organisms here. Hopefully we know the differences between indicator species and keystone species. Hopefully you understand how all these organisms work together. If you don't understand this lesson, please send me an email. But if you do, that means you pretty much have completed Unit 2. And hopefully you're sitting here going, wow, that's awesome. I'm done 2 out of 9 units for the AP Environmental Science exam. I feel like I'm in great shape. And I feel you are in great shape as well. So hopefully everything is working out for you and you are not hating this whole learning process. I'm trying my hardest to make it as engaging as I can for you. I look forward to seeing you in the next unit when we start talking about Unit 3, which deals with population. We're really going to start to make a change now. We're not going to be talking about ecosystems as much. We're hoping that we've built the foundation for ecosystems. Now we're going to start to talk about populations and eventually structure of the earth and then pollution and all these other things and how everything kind of factors together. But in the meantime, enjoy it and be glad that you are done Unit 2. I look forward to seeing you next time when we start talking about populations. Have a good one, everybody.
You like that lesson? I know you did. So why don't you go ahead and smash that like button right now. Go ahead and comment. Tell all your friends about how great that lesson was. And make sure you subscribe, because I'm going to keep bringing you AP environmental content that you're going to want to watch. Or do whatever else those other YouTube channels tell you to do. And with that, Maloney.